Hi, this is Brendan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Joel Clark for episode 3 of Wuxia Workshop. And today we're going to go over a number of different topics, and I think we're starting with our Sharing Inspiration segment, where we talk about movies that we saw this week and try to relate them to design and wuxia and various things. And I think the first movie on the list was something that you chose, The Thing from 1982. Do you want to walk it in for us?
Yeah, actually, and the important thing to remember about The Thing is that it's actually the John Carpenter remake of The Thing. The original Thing was, I think it was just kind of a standard B monster movie from the 50s, and it was captivating to his imagination because even though it was kind of a standard schlocky B movie, it was more about it's about like a shape-shifting alien monster, and it was structured in such a way that it was more about like the people in the movie not knowing which one of them might be the Thing, and so it kind of had like this spy horror element thing, and yeah, like that's the original inspiration. But what he did with it was really fantastic because like, and I'm sure you just watched this too. The creature effects in that movie wound up being the star far more than the tension. Although again, that was pretty impressive. It's a movie with a really strong atmosphere, really colorful, interesting characters, a great premise, really good visual effects, and it is just scary and like visually arresting and fascinating. So let's tell us all about your most recent viewing of things. I rewatched it myself too, but remember I watch this thing every couple of months because I love it so much.
So this is like a big one for. Okay, I haven't seen this since the 90s. I remember one of my friends in high school really liked this movie, and so whenever I went over his house, this movie would be on, and the last time I saw it was one time over his house. And also the last time I saw it was on an old tube TV. You know, like we didn't have the HD TVs back then. And so the thing that struck me watching it this time, because I now have like a widescreen TV and like a Blu-ray player, it's a really well-made movie. Like it really looks nice on screen. They really get the Arctic sort of environment down, and it's it just looks really nice, and a lot of the scenes are very striking, and a lot more so than I recalled them being. But my heater went out over the weekend, and so I think on Monday is when I decided to rewatch it, and I was like, well, it's like 40 or something in here. I'm gonna watch The Thing, and hopefully it'll help immerse me into the experience. It actually did. I found it very immersive. It added a lot. It added a lot to my enjoyment. And yeah, so I mean, again, it's The Thing. I think for me, two things about this movie that sort of, I guess, stood out watching this time. Number one, the practical effects really hold up in a surprising way. Like I've seen a lot of movies. Yeah, because I've seen a lot of movies from the 80s where I watch them again and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember how bad things used to be. And this is one where I was sort of longing to see more practical effects. And in fact, I kind of went down the rabbit hole on YouTube looking, because I saw it. I was like, I'm not done watching this. I need to go and see other people's thoughts on The Thing, and I guess there was a remake of it fairly recently, and they tried.
I remember.
Well, the thing is, apparently what they were trying to do is they started out originally wanting to use mainly practical effects, but the executives stepped in and they're like, no, we need to have a lot of CGI. And again, I don't know who's right or wrong in this situation, but what people were saying is that it really kind of ruined the visual effect of that film. I haven't seen the remake, so
we really should watch that one and compare them. I watched that one too when it came out, and I remember I didn't hate it, but like I don't remember it. Like that's kind of where that one is for me. But the John Carpenter's version that's memorable. Like you don't soon forget some of the things you see in that movie. It's almost like David Cronenberg levels of like, it's because all the thing is like this protoplasmic fleshy thing, but it's not ill defined. One of the things that drives me crazy a lot, and this happened in the recent, not recent, but the somewhat recent Superman movie, Man of Steel, where at the end of it he's fighting this big alien artifact monster, and it's just a bunch of black gooey tentacles that's all ill-defined. I'm like, how are you supposed to punch that? But the thing isn't just a bunch of protoplasm, it's like something, or turning into something, and everything it turns into is horrible.
Okay.
fleshy and pulpy and bony and veiny, and it's just so gross and goopy. Ugh, I love it.
The effects in this really get, and there's sort of like a there's like a body horror thing going on too.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's why I was kind of Cronenberg-y, because it reminded me a lot of The Fly. Remember that, the Cronenberg?
Oh yeah,
Fly?
yeah, I remember The Fly. Yeah, In fact, one of the videos that I watched on YouTube after I saw this was a panel with what's his name, Landis, John Carpenter, and Cronenberg. Like right after this was before The Fly, but it was like right after The Thing was made, or around that time, I think. And it was a really interesting discussion. But
I gotta find that. That sounds cool.
Yeah, I'll send you the link to it. It was a pretty interesting conversation that they had. And again, it's I kind of like going back and looking at some of these. I like seeing how people talked about things, like even if it was a time when I was alive. Going back to like '82. There's a whole other conversation going on than you have now. Do you know what I mean? And so it's always interesting to see how those evolve over time and what sort of pressing issues people bring to the table to talk about. But the other thing about the movie that obviously people like about it, and is the thing that I think is what really stands out, is the paranoia, the way that the characters just don't know who they can trust, and they don't know who's the thing, and the movie's really effective, I think, at managing that aspect of it. Even to the point that at the end, the ending is so ambiguous.
It is, because you're like, wait a minute.
So let me ask you, since this is a movie you really like, what's your take on the ending? Do you have a take, or do you just sort of accept it for what it is?
That's a hard one, because like on the one hand, like you sort of don't want a horror movie to have a happy ending. Mm-hmm. And like, so what you want is you want that to be the Thing and the guy are sitting there, and that's the last little moment that you get. It's a real Lady and the Tiger kind of thing. And like, you sort of want that to have been like the dark version of that, where it's like, oh, it's the tiger. That's definitely the Thing. It kills him and assimilates him, and then the world is doomed. Because that, I don't know, that sort of turns it into a nihilistic movie, though. Which, I don't know, the premise is apocalyptic when you get right down to it. That's what is so frightening about it, is because it's not just that they're fighting for their lives, which they are, they're fighting for the fate of the whole world. That's why they go to the extremes they go to, where at the end of like blowing up the base and everything. So if that is the Thing in the end, that movie is ultimately like, okay, they failed. They tried their best, but they're doomed. The alien was too crafty for them, and it beat them. And if it isn't, or if he manages to overcome the Thing and he dies in the snow anyway, that's still kind of a downer ending. But it is one that has like that little shred of hope, where it's like, hey, look, they saved the whole world, though. They all went down fighting. Kind of a Captain Nemo ending. So it sort of depends on the mood I'm in when I'm watching it. And I like that it's a Lady and the Tiger ending, because I get to determine how I feel about it afterwards.
Yep.
Usually I like the tiger. I like the really dark ending of that one, because it makes the whole thing so much scarier.
See, I like to think that the bottle has gasoline in it, and that he's about to use his flamethrower when he gets the energy. But I don't know that, just because I don't know. There's something about the laugh that he has when what's his name, Childs? Is that the when he drinks the?
Yeah, that's the other guy.
Yeah, when he drinks the I think it's whiskey or something like that, or bourbon. But yeah, I don't know. So we'll get to Buddha's Palm in a little bit, but I did want to sort of tie, because people are maybe confused. Why are we talking about the Thing? And I wanted to tie it to Wuxia.
Yes, this is important.
So I want to get to what why you were interested in this movie. But my immediate thought was, like just watching this, because one of the things that we're gonna try to talk about today is genre blending, and how you can blend different genres into Wuxia. And my thought was this would be really cool to sort of use on an NPC who's taking a really strange cultivation path. Do you know what I mean? So like a character who can sort of do who can do what the Thing can do, but his abilities grow over the course. Like it would depend on the game you're using, but if the game has levels or
we have a character in the intro thing. You haven't gotten it, because I only seen the Act 1 of that one. In Act 2, when the sand demon guy shows up, that's what he does. Like his genes were all screwed up by the Empire as like this celestial punishment, so he can take parts of monsters and the people and just blend them to himself. And
Yeah,
like so, there's a and that's a good point. The Thing is an alien monster, and like when you want to tie something that's that weird back to Wuxia, you got to understand that one of the things about Wuxia and the conceits of it is that it's human beings cultivating their personal excellence. So that same kind of element where you got like this weird protoplasmic monster can exist, but the beginning framework of it isn't going to be it came from outer space and it's an alien. The beginning framework is going to be this person is developing their excellence and they found a strange path to take, like you're describing.
yeah.
So its original framing has a very different kind of very different setup.
No, I agree. Though I will say this: I saw a movie recently called The Thousand Faces of Dunja. It's a Shui Hark or Choi Hark production, and it was directed by Yuan Wu Ping. And it's a big sort of epic kind of blockbuster type film. But in that movie, they actually do have the Thing come from outer space. Now it's not a proper wuxia movie like a wuxia purist would see this movie and say, well, that's got like elements of Transformers and elements of Men in Black and all these other things. It's a remake of one of his of an earlier film called Miracle Fighters, but they take a huge number of liberties with where they go with it. But it was actually really I mean, I'm still not sure what I think about the film. I've been holding off even reviewing it because I still don't know how I feel about this movie. But I will say, as far as gaming material goes, I think it's one of the better films out there to borrow on for this kind of thing. I think the only trouble that you would run into in any kind of Chinese type setting is whatever cosmology you happen to be using. If aliens are an impossibility due to the cosmology, you might have to come up with some other explanation. But it was really interesting. It was really interesting to have sort of the martial world connect with this power that's an alien being. But with your stuff, I that's what I wanted to ask you, is how much of it was this movie. Were you consciously drawing on this movie in any of your material, or?
I think with good old Sandy, I was like with him. And the issue with inheriting characters, which is, I mean, the whole thing that I'm doing is basically his Journey to the West again. But one of the issues with inheriting characters is that if you have a character that's kind of a dud, like Sandy was in the actual Journey to the West,
you don't like Sandy?
He's boring. Like after his intro, which is cool, he's got the skull necklace. That's really righteous. But after that, he's just like, I'm here. I got
okay, fair enough.
Stick.
I mean, I guess Pigsy is more.
Pigsy is my jam, yo. Yeah, I got into Pig. Actually, Pigsy wound up being a really interesting character too, which I may have to go into.
Pigsy is very memorable. I will say that it's a lot easier to forget Sandy. I think you might be onto something there.
It's not that he's a terrible character; he's just dull comparatively. Because you've got Monkey there, you've got Sun Wukong, you've got I call him Trippy Taka. That's not his actual name. He's going to get the Trippy Taka. I just call him Trip because I like that better. But like we got the monk, you've got the freaking Monkey King, you've got the shape-shifting pig demon, then you got this big guy with a stick. He's alright. So I wanted to make big guy with a stick a little more like, and of course I have the great advantage that I have David Ramirez on my side, and that guy is super genius when it comes to creativity. I think he was the guy that originally pitched him as this kind of like, well, let's make him let's go with. David knows a lot about Chinese mythology that I don't know. So he's like, well, there's a lot more stuff here, and we can blend that with this. So when it finally got handed over to me, I was just there to do the rules. So I'm like, well, okay, we've got this great idea of someone who's genetically been like screwed with, but that kind of makes them like malleable in a genetic way. So I went straight for the jugular with the Thing and anything from Cronenberg and stuff like that. I'm like, gimme.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of wonderful, grotesque stuff like that, because it's something I'm into.
Well, and how do you, like, because I feel like with, and again, Journey to the West I know is not, it's more mythic than wuxia, but like it obviously, there's so much crossover. But, a lot of times I find that when people are talking about wuxia, they're very reluctant to bring other things into it. There's like there's more of a line around what you're what people feel you can add to it. But I feel like when I go and I look at a wuxia novel or I watch a really good wuxia movie, the things that often set them apart are what they decide to borrow from and add to it. Do you know what I mean? Like you look at like a Gulong book, which will oftentimes have sort of like detective elements or noir or something like that in there, and I feel in certain movies, like the one that we're going to talk about in a moment, will borrow freely from genres. I feel like that can really add to the experience. So I think it's fine. I think that sort of thing is, especially in a game where the point is.
Oh yeah, in a game, and I like to point out, like, the reason that and I think that people do get a little bit maybe too uptight, and I'm guilty of this too, when they're defining things like wuxia. And it's important to keep in mind that, yes, we do make certain that we use language to mean things. The reason we have wuxia as a genre, and we've got some, like, strict definitions of that, is just so we know what we're talking about, though. It's not to keep all creativity within that little genre box.
Yeah,
It's important to separate those things in your mind.
Yeah, because I think it's really useful to know what the term is supposed to mean.
Yes,
that's incredibly useful. I think where I get frustrated is when knowing what it means becomes something that constrains the gaming of it. Then
you don't want to. It is so futile to fight against, like you were talking about, the kind of cultural cross pollination. Don't even try, man. Someone is going to make something awesome that you think should never exist, and you're going to be really wrong. Sorry.
Well, and so much of it is a product of that. I mean, there's like a lot of the great directors, they're not operating in isolation. They're drawing on things that were going on in Japan and things that were going on in the States. There's Western elements being incorporated into a lot of these movies. So I think the genre blending is pretty important.
It is. Case in point, the Journey to the West thing. One of the reasons I pitched so hard for it is because of a manga called Monkey that was done by Katsuyu Terada, and like that again, it's just Journey to the West, but it's reimagined in this super surreal like future punk kind of way. It's amazing. Like, it's visually breathtaking, and it's extremely well told, and it's pulpy and just it's so good. Like, Dark Horse did a release of it. And, like, if you can get your grubby mitts on Monkey by Katsuya Terada, do it. Because you'll know everything that I love about Journey to the West, envisioned by a Japanese artist. And, like, he uses it as an excuse, not really an excuse, but, like, as a platform for exploring current social issues through the lens of modern, really high-class manga art. Mm-hmm. And, like, I'm an American, he's Japanese, and it's a Chinese story.
Yeah.
That's some serious cultural blend and drift right there.
No, and that happens a lot. That happens with all kinds of movies too, and all kinds of books. I just feel like sometimes again, it's good to know what it is, but it's also good to remember that there's, like, I think the people making this stuff, they don't want those rails necessarily inhibiting them. At least that's the impression I get from a lot of the directors that I watch. Especially, I mean, obviously someone like Choi Hark, maybe to an extreme degree, but even other directors that are just sort of drawing on things like westerns and noir. You look at a lot of these Choi Yuen movies, and they have that. And I think that would bring us naturally to Buddha's Palm, which I think you watched last night.
And just watched it. It's fresh.
And so why don't we get your impression of the movie before we?
I'm going to lead in everything today. Okay, so I'm a big fan. Seeing as I'm kind of creating the successor game to Legends of the Will and Weapons of the Gods, I'm a big fan of Manhwa, which is Chinese comic books. This movie is like watching a live-action Chinese comic book. It's super cool. It is zany. It is colorful. It is almost cartoonishly action-packed. It is thrilling, and as I said to my wife last night, I can't take my eyes off this movie. It was so much fun to watch. Oh man, you almost don't even know where to start. I think even the movie struggled with that, because it starts out and it's like this super powerful dude mastering a magical kung fu technique in a cave, and like his disciple breaks through the stone into the cave, and he's like, "Master, you're dying," and he's like, "Yup, here, have a cloak." and then it's like, and then he killed the entire martial world. 20 years later, and you're just like, wait a minute, movie.
Yeah, everything in this movie is it moves at an accelerated clip. Like you get these chunks of story, and then boom, like 20 years later, or now they're over here, and now they're over here, and it's really, I don't know. This film is, I found one of the hardest ones to shake out of my mind after I saw it. That
it gets in there.
And there's and again, it's almost not even worth discussing the story because the story is so. There is a story.
Worth of actual story.
Well,
like, that's the thing, but the story isn't what you come for. You come for the characters.
Yeah.
You know? And those characters are unreal.
There is a story, but you don't tend to sort of sit there and sort of chart it out in your mind as it's going. You're really sort of focused on all of the colors, all of the effects, all of the characters. The characters in this are really kind of the, they pop on the screen and you instantly know what they're all about. And they also make a lot of interesting comedic choices in this movie.
There's very much a lot of comedy to it.
Yeah, because there's that scene where like the martial world sort of shows up at the crime scene and they're rebuking him. And all of the and most of them are characters you haven't seen at all up until this point, and they're all haggard and they don't look like normally the people that play the actors of the martial world are really charismatic actors that have like carry themselves a certain way, and these look like all the people that typically play like wait staff and grandmothers and like man selling buns.
The face, it's all like shoved up to the side. You're like, oh yeah, that guy hit me in the face.
Yeah, and they're so diminutive compared to all of the other characters that it's really a striking scene. But yeah, the movie it kind of veers into comedy, and it's what I would describe as Gonzo Wuxia. I think this qualifies as kind of you have the, so number one, there's basically a lightsaber in the movie. There's a sword.
They can think of the same sound effect.
Yeah. They were and interesting. I think it was a green lightsaber, and I think it was made before Return of the Jedi.
Interesting.
So
it was 82. So yeah, what's the timeline on that? We need to look that up.
Because wasn't Return of the Jedi 83? I could be mistaken.
You're right. I think you're right.
Now maybe the green lightsaber made an appearance before that I'm and I forget or I'm not aware of it.
Sure, because the end of the Empire was him losing the blue one, and then it pretty much wrapped after that, as I recall. Okay. I think we were all like, because he whips it out next to Jabba's palace, right? In Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, that's when I remember it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you're right. I think there was a little gulf there, and I think that sword might have showed up beforehand.
So, but there's a lightsaber. There's
a dragon. Let's not forget the live action dragon.
Yeah, that looks like it's out of Jim Henson's workshop. He's almost like a Fu Lion or a Biji or Bixi. I'm not, he's I think the character's name is Demung, and he's this really sort of large, kind of funny, fuzzy creature, and he again, I feel that he looks like he's just pulled right out of a Jim Henson movie. But
yeah, I kept making fun of him like he was Falcor.
yeah, he's got a Falcor vibe. He's got a Falcor vibe for sure.
Yeah, he saves people, and like I'm not sure how much of it was intentional comedy. Like I want to say it was 100% like they wrote this knowing it was a joke, but like a recurring thing that happens is someone falls off their little mountain city, the city of mist, and that dragon will just swoop by and grab him, bring him right to the cave.
I don't think those were funny. I don't think those were meant to be funny. I think there were things that were meant to be funny. Like Bigu of Eastern Island was, I believe, meant to be a humorous character.
Oh man, Bigu. We got to talk about Bigu of Eastern Island, because the thing about this character is he announces his name like Leroy Jenkins and where he's from before he walks into any scene. Bigu of Eastern Island. You'll hear him yodeling that from off camera, and everyone will like look over like, what? And then he just comes strutting in like, it's me, people, deal with it.
Yeah,
I love Bigu so much. He wandered onto the screen, and I turned to my wife and I was like, that's my favorite character. I know in my bones.
well, number one, I think a lot of it is because it's played by Lo Lieh, who is just one of his strengths as a Shaw Brothers actor was playing villains. He's the guy who basically gave us the version of Pai Mei that we know. He played him in like 3 movies at least.
That was Pai Mei, really?
Yeah. The Pai Mei from Clan of the White.
From Kill Bill, right?
Well, Kill Bill, but that was based on it's a historical character, number one, but in Executioners from Shaolin and Abbot of Shaolin and Clan of the White Lotus, where in that version technically it's not Pai Mei, it's like his sect brother, but it's basically Pai Mei.
Is it the same kind of?
Yeah, same exact appearance, but slightly different abilities. But yeah, no. If you watch Executioners from Shaolin, and you'll if you liked Pai Mei from Kill Bill,
I did.
Yeah, Executioners from Shaolin is definitely worth seeing. As is Clan of the White Lotus. And Abbot of Shaolin's really good, but that's a little harder to get your hands on these days. But Lolier, he's an outstanding actor, and he really is quite brilliant at the comedy that he's doing, and he has the whole scene where he's like, I chop, and he sends out all these these beams of energy, and that scene where the main character is played by Derek Yee, and he goes up to Derek Yee's character and tries to make him be a student, and he says, but we look exactly alike, and they look nothing alike. And,
no, not even a little bit.
And he's like, what are you talking about? We look nothing alike. And he says, no, I have a nose, and you have a nose, and I have eyes, and you have
eyes. Look at your eyes. You also have eyes. Yeah. And it's just like, oh my god, I love the chop. Again, going back to the chops, he throws literal green beams of energy out at this just tar paper shack. And he's like, see? And the guy just looks, and nothing happened to the shack. Yeah. And so he's like, okay, wait a minute. So he uses some kind of super breath to blow it over, and still nothing happens. And the guy starts leaving. He's like, wait, no, it's super powerful. Trust me.
Yeah,
oh my god, what a great character.
Yeah, I think he really completes the movie. I mean, there's a lot of good things about this film. I also like Kara Hoy's character. I think Derek Yee is a good lead. A lot of people I've heard complain about him as a leading character, but I really like Derek Yee.
Yeah, he was great.
And
he was really I really liked him. There wasn't a ton to him. Like, he wasn't super present, and I think this is because he was playing alongside of guys like that just when they're on screen, that's all you can think about.
Yeah.
And that's the only weakness, I would say.
Yeah, because he's playing the protagonist, so.
It's almost a secondary character in his own movie. It's interesting. But
yeah, and again, this is a movie where it really you get a good sense of what a martial world looks like how it's populated, and that's so essential to the genre. But it's willing to do crazy things. You got like the golden egg with the red energy beam that can cure scars and blindness. You have the Soon Bi Ling character with the weird mask on her face.
I loved that mask. Can we talk about just some of the amazing visual effects in this movie? Like, the mask was really creepy.
Yeah.
It was shiny, like it was lacquered or plastic or something, and like it looked like a really poor facsimile of a face, and it was just so unnerving hearing her like mask muffled voice underneath that thing with the painted on staring monster eyes. That was great stuff. I understand that there were some limitations to how they could do special effects, and a lot of that was clearly painted onto the celluloid in post-production. Yeah. But for that, it looked really good.
Well, it was rotoscoping. It's rotoscoping, and I think for that period, yeah, that was rotoscope. I'm pretty sure. And I think it was there's a few movies that do this. So like there's a towards the early 80s, a lot of these Shaw Brothers wuxia films, some of them really start taking some crazy chances.
Wow.
And this is one of those movies. There's also a movie like Holy Flame of the Martial World. There's another movie, I can't remember the exact year it was made, but Bastard Swordsman gets kind of into this territory. And there are some, I would say, less successful attempts, but still worth checking out. I think it's Voyage of the Doomed or Journey of the Doomed is one of them. And there's a couple of others that sort of would leap to mind. But I don't know. I just love sort of the rampant use of those visuals
they're rampant. They're all over this movie, and like they look they look good. Like there's a unified look to this movie that you don't. I didn't anticipate that. I was like, this is going to be zany, and it's going to because the opening credits where they have all the little cutouts of the Manhao characters, and there's like fire in the background. They're like, this is happening now. I was like, okay, this is going to be a little uneven. No, not really. That's the only scene that's like that. Almost all of it is a real unified look, which, I mean, considering you've got literal cartoons sharing the screen with brightly colored costumes and set pieces and things, it's stunning that they were able to like unify the visual so that nothing really stood out as, oh, that looks terrible. Nah, not really. It's got a real Clash of the Titans kind of vibe when you get into it.
Yeah. Well, and we were talking about how do you define Gonzo? And one of the things that we were saying, kind of based on what people have said online is, it's sort of this exaggerated sort of unfiltered imagination of that gets into the surreal but is coherent. It's not like just all it's not just things kind of match. Things kind of match in an interesting way. And it's not zany. It's not wacky. It's not goofy. Well, it can be kind of those things, but like you said, it has a sort of underlying structure that informs it. Like for example, Rocket Raccoon as in Guardians of the Galaxy is a really good example of something that's Gonzo because he makes perfect sense in the context of that universe, but he's still a tiny sass-talking raccoon with a bunch of guns. Yeah,
it's fighting aliens. Yeah, sure, that all makes sense. That's true, but that's pretty Gonzo.
No, and that's what a lot of the stuff in this sort of feels like to me. And also, I feel like the energy level through this, because like you said, it's zany, but it's almost, I would almost use like the word frenetic to describe it, because it gets intense at times. It takes that same energy it's using to make you laugh to suddenly have the main character spinning around and muttering and accumulating his power in a really dangerous way. And in those moments, it goes from being humorous to intense.
That's a really good point because you're right. The energy level is unified across the whole thing. Like, and sometimes it's kind of played for laughs, but other times it's not. They use the same energy level and they have a different emotional underpinning to it. Like you said, sometimes like it's when they're getting poisoned or when they're having to like transfer, like whenever that last scene where Old Devil is getting tortured by the drums of the Heavenly Foot. And he's just sitting there like, come on, put his palm work for me. And he keeps having to clutch his ears because they're about to spurt blood. It's like that scene is shot like some kind of music video. It's like cut, cut, cut. It's really high energy, but you're like, it's almost gut wrenching because you're like, man, this guy's really getting his ass kicked.
No, and,
so yeah, different emotional context.
And I think the other thing in terms of gaming where this movie really works for me is they create like a whole world that is contained, and you can imagine this as a map that a GM has in front of them. Like all those locations, they're all highly gameable locations, and the people are all they'd be very easy NPCs to manage in a campaign. So you just you could watch this movie and just take everything that you saw in the film, put it onto a hex map, just a single hex map of a region. And you'd have a weekend of gaming from that at least, I think. Without making anything that you didn't see. Like, you might have to expand on some of the stuff. But, like, there were enough locations that you could probably get a weekend of gaming out of it.
You can get an easy weekend, yeah. I mean, like, and there's a lot of implied locations, too, that you could develop just a little bit and have, like, the underpinnings of a really good campaign. And like, actually, I had flashbacks a lot to Legends of the Wulin, which was really big into that, and Weapons of the Gods did that too, where it was like, okay, so the people and the clans are going to be really important to how your game is structured. Really, the only thing I felt that those games lacked was like linking it to a map in a more structured way, because they were really big on like, hey, look, chart the relationships and make certain that there are rivalries and things like that in your martial world. This movie does a great job of showing you, hey, look, all the people, all the heads of these Kung Fu clans have relationships with each other, and they have a history with each other. And so, like, that's informing what you're seeing here and all the drama. That was great. Especially because a lot of it was done in callback. Like, hey, remember 20 years ago when this happened? And they just give you a little clip like, we didn't know that, like, as an audience, but they did.
I find having a big event in the past of the campaign, like 20 or 10 years ago, really adds to that. Like having one thing that really works is having the players be sort of the new generation living in the shadow of this big event, so they might not have all the pieces. And
your
so
Battle of Tiansha, if you will.
Yeah, it's just.
By the way, I love that. Oh, it was Tiansha. That's really cool. Because every time they said it, I was like, yeah.
Well, and the thing I liked about it was, you sort of they were when you first see the backstory, it's not totally clear like who the bad guys are and who the good guys are. That emerges over the course of the movie. So it emerges pretty quickly. I also liked the commentary from the narration. This is a movie that's really made, I think, for wuxia fans. It's if you've seen a lot of wuxia movies or read a lot of wuxia books, there's a narration in the film that will occasionally, it's not overbearing, but it'll occasionally comment on, oh, well, if this character had read more wuxia novels, he wouldn't have fallen for this obvious trick.
Yeah, they say that at one point in the movie, don't they?
Yeah, that's one of the things they say.
Clearly, he hasn't read many wuxia novels.
Yeah, a character gets stabbed in the back by somebody who he probably should have been more alert to, and it says, well, clearly he didn't read a lot of wuxia. So it was. I thought it was pretty funny, but it's not constant. It's just enough to. Yeah,
the narrator. I want to point that was said by the narrator. There's a narrator in this movie, and it's great because you're right. They don't overuse it. It's just a fine little spice, and they add it anytime they need that little thing to kick a scene right over the top.
Yeah.
Love it.
And they'll even like comment directly to the characters sometimes, like, "Oh, you thought you were gonna have an easy life after this, didn't you?" It's a really charming movie. I think that I don't know if this is a movie that I recommend for people who haven't seen wuxia yet. I might recommend a more sedate wuxia
this
movie
would be your
first.
intro. You might get the wrong impression if this was your first first heading into it.
Yeah, because you might see it. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Like, if you ever seen any other ones, this almost plays like a parody.
Yeah.
Like it's right in that line, which again, impressive balancing act.
Yeah.
So.
And there are a few parodies out there. There's also one in the '90s that's based on Condor Heroes. It's called Eagle Shooting Heroes, and it's a real parody of those kind of stories. This one, it sort of has one foot in the parody world and one foot. It's like a sincere parody, if that makes sense. It has just enough self-awareness that you chuckle, but it still has a lot of stuff to chew on. And
you know what this is? This is like the wuxia equivalent of the 1960s Adam West Batman.
Yeah.
Where it's like, we're gonna legit make Batman, but also we understand that's kind of a stupid premise, so we're gonna roll with that.
Yeah, there's a bit of a winking to the audience on occasion with it. There's that. There is definitely that going on, but it feels like it's done out of love, not because they're trying to tear apart the genre. And another thing is it has like virtually every wuxia trope you can think. Like it just like even to the point that it seemed like I'm not familiar with the original graphic novel it's based on, so I don't know. And I've heard different things, but it looks to me like there's a lot in here that feels like different Louis Cha stories. And so you have like Little Dragon Girl as a character. And interestingly enough, I think the woman who plays Little Dragon Girl plays the actual Little Dragon Girl in Little Dragon Maiden movie.
What do you make of that?
I don't know, because they're totally. It's not like they're. It's a different. I mean, that's like in that one she's actually playing Xiao Long Nu, but in this one, I don't know if it was just the fact that it was the same actress, and so they. Oops, sorry about that.
Stutter alert.
Yeah. So I don't know if it was that it was the if they were just sometimes if they're marketing something to a foreign audience, they'll just use whatever name is familiar. So maybe that wasn't actually meant to be the name of the character, but in all of the in all of the movie databases and everything, it's Little Dragon Maiden or Little Dragon Girl. So, but yeah. So I don't know. I think there's a lot that you can get from gaming from this one, and I think we'll alarm went off, so I think we'll move into the next segment at this point. All right, so the next segment is problems in design, and I think we wanted to talk. We wanted to continue some of the discussion about genre blending, but also talk about handling high-powered PCs in Wuxia and Mythic campaigns. And obviously, this is going to be something that I think you are dealing with a lot because of the stuff you're working on. Because I deal with it too, but mainly it's because of the Mythic elements that I've incorporated. Not quite as much from the Wuxia, though I still have. There still is that, because in Wuxia you will have these characters that are that get their hands on a really good manual or technique, or again, it's very system dependent, obviously. But in the game that I run, they'll get their hands on a technique and it'll become like a instant win anytime they use it. And so that's something that you have to sort of know how to manage. And I'm curious where you've sort of seen this problem.
Oh yeah, and that's even in Buddha's Palm, where like there's a guy, he's got the best technique, and that spurs all the action in the movie. So it's really important, especially in Wuxia, to have the secret manual, the reclusive master, the forbidden technique. Like you almost have to have it, because that's the whole reason people start fighting and going and doing.
Yeah.
But then the question becomes like, well, okay, when someone gets it, then what happens? Because now you've got someone who's well above the power curve.
Yeah.
Oh, just Roland? Buddy, I'm kind of in the middle of recording this thing. That is super awesome. Go ahead and play your game, all right? Ah, the fun of 4. That's a good age. I remember being 4 and watching the Transformers movie.
Yeah, and we should mention that Joel is on dad duty today, so that is the
yep, on the dad shift. So my apologies for child interruption.
But
I think that's a pretty good summation of the problem, right? Like you almost have to have the super powerful technique there, but when someone gets it, suddenly you've got to deal with that in the game, an ongoing thing. So that is the simple version of the problem.
And I think in those instances too, it's also, if it's something you're introducing, only introduce things that you're willing to deal with consequences for. Obviously, sometimes there will be things that have unforeseen consequences, but if you're putting it in your setting, I mean, you're putting it in your, it's on you if it's your own game. And
unforeseen, I want to point this out, unforeseen consequences, like if you introduce something that's innocuous to the game and it turns out to have a huge effect, you can talk to players about that, like, hey, guys, I didn't mean for this to be that. I don't want the game to be about this. And so you've got that. But if you intentionally put in the Buddha's Palm or like the all-destroying Lotus Kick or whatever you put into your game, from premise, that's there to break the game.
Yeah,
that's what we're talking about with the high-powered stuff, where, like, no, we knew what we were doing, and now we deal with the consequences of it coming to fruition in the game.
And I think there are a number of ways to handle that, because one solution that I've found is something I call the evolving kung fu landscape, where the players might acquire a really okay. There was a technique in the game I had that had unforeseen consequences. Blade of the Dancing Fox. It became everybody started taking it after a while because it was so good, and in my initial thought was, oh, I made a mistake. I need to get rid of that technique. I need to talk to the players about it. But then I realized, oh no, a really good tool can exist in a setting, and what will tend to happen is somebody will produce a counter to that tool. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like the flying guillotine situation, and so coming up with an answer to the super powerful ability is sometimes a way to manage the problem.
Oh yeah, and again, that's well supported in the fiction in Wuxia, You have he's got the super powerful technique, but the other thing you can start a story with even is we have developed the counter technique, and this is the guy that has that, or how do we develop the counter technique? Completely reasonable. And like you're right, it makes it so that instead of it being a sort of zero-sum game, it's an evolving paradigm. And that when it's dynamic like that, you don't really have to worry about, because you're not necessarily hitting a higher plateau of like overall power where you're completely breaking through the genre expectations. You're just making something that's better numerically. And that's not too hard to say, okay, well, there's a counter for it, or there's several counters for it, and then it just becomes part of the new paradigm of like people that are good at martial arts are at least this good and master at least these techniques. That's fine. That's wonderful.
And you even see that in real martial arts, if you watch the UFC or traditional martial arts, you'll see in competitions, people will discover that something works and they'll use it, and then the response to that begins to take hold, and then it becomes an obsolete. Once the it can become obsolete after a while as a tactic, or it could become something that isn't ubiquitously used to win every time. And so I think that's it's plausible. It makes sense. It gives you again this only can work if the game you're using allows you to have responses like that in it. It really is very system dependent. But I've
this is true.
That's
very true.
I'm sorry. What were you gonna say?
I just say that's very true. I was agreeing with you.
But I've even gone so far as to have like specific counters that are specific to techniques. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is only for this one technique.
That's not even out of the realm of possibility. Like, again, that's in the fiction, and like this may maybe not be quite as satisfying as the more tactically robust way of saying that everything just evolves. It's a lot less work, though. Dear Lord.
That's true. And the other solution that can work is to place requirements on whatever if you have a character that gets really powerful, maybe have that power have some responsibility attached to it, or whatever the source of that power is. Maybe there's a consequence to the power.
Yeah. Well, don't people get possessed by demons in your game if they get superpowers?
Well, no, they get. Well, so what can happen is if they overextend themselves, they can get possessed by spirits, but it's not necessarily connected to their power level. With getting more powerful, I guess most of the responses that I tend to be in-setting responses. So things like counter techniques, things like, if you're the most powerful guy in the world, people will start coming after you, wanting to sort of prove that they're better than you. That kind of thing is sort of how I would handle it.
That's a great way of handling it when you don't want to like crack into the actual redesigning of techniques and designing a new tactical landscape. You can just straight up make their life hell. Okay, you're the most powerful now. That's not necessarily what you wanted to be.
Yeah. No, and there's a reason why people will sometimes hide their level of ability in these kind of settings, precisely for that reason. If you and not just that, but if you have the ultimate technique that can beat everybody, people are going to want that technique. They're going to, so they'll come after you to try to get you to reveal it or to steal your manual. So again, I don't think you don't have to make it miserable for the player, but if you make it believably complicated, the players who don't have that ability might be somewhat thankful that they don't. So
I would like to point out, it is completely fair if you are warning the player beforehand, like the player, not the character, just like, hey, look, you're about to master the 10,000 Dragon Fist. This is not going to go super well for you. Like, you're going to have this power, yeah, but like, legit, no one else has this. You're going to throw the power curve, and like, you're going to be on everyone's list. So just so you know, before your character knows this, in character, you understand that this is going to happen. So I want you to know as a player. And then after that, like, you almost got free reign as a GM to be like, okay, well, I mean, yeah, you've got an assassin attacking you. You don't know why, but I mean, like, I'm going to tell you, out of character, you probably strongly suspect it's because you mastered the 10,000 Dragon Fist.
And if it's a GM who doesn't like going out a character like that, or like speaking directly to the player, they can just transfer that information to the backstory of the manual or something. They can still convey it to them, so that like, the last guy who had this was slaughtered by the, you know what I mean? Like, there can be.
Or like the 10,000 Typhoon Ninja destroyed this guy. So, if you don't want to mess with them, don't master the stupid scroll.
But yeah, I mean, again, so much of the genre revolves around battles over scrolls and techniques. So, and in all of these series and books and movies, often the guy that's standing at the pinnacle of it will, it comes with complications. It comes with serious complications. It's not necessarily a picnic, and so I don't really have a problem allowing a character to rise. I had a character who became the leader of the Wulin at one point in my setting, and he
Woolen
was,
Mangel.
I think, burdened by the responsibilities, the people that were coming after, and it wasn't like I was assailing him constantly, but it's enough that I think that that kind of position in a setting where things are reactive, it balances out on its own.
Oh yeah, and if you and you've clearly done this, if you seek a balance that naturally makes the choices that players have reinforce choices that characters make in that genre, you have 100% succeeded in what you're trying to do. Okay, this is a lot of responsibility. I should vanish from the martial world and become a reclusive hermit. Oh my God, yes, do that. That's great.
Yep. And now, but here's a question. Like, we're kind of talking more about like Wuxia scale now. But what about when you get through that, like, to the god level scale?
Okay, so
really
that's what I'm. Yeah.
game breaking.
Okay, so Tiancheng, one of the things I set out to do with it, and this is a lifelong goal of mine. If I can pull it off, I'll be very happy with myself, and I'm actually pretty proud of it so far. Was to make sure we could do stuff that went like well past the point of reasonable power scales.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking like the more stupidly powerful limits of Dragon Ball Z, the stuff you saw in the video game Ashura's Wrath, like the stuff that's so past even like what you could conceive of using as a power gamer for power scale, that almost like pun level of nightmare levels of power. We're like, okay, we want to get there. We want that to be within the scope of a well-run campaign. And so that's a big chunk of cake to slice off as a designer and try to eat your way through. And yeah, like when you're talking about the stuff in the martial world and tactical response, you can use that same stuff even with the really crazy power level. And I know that because it happened in Dragon Ball Z. And Dragon Ball Z has been my recurring template for, hey, look, you can do the same stuff. You can do the martial world. You can do that same evolving tactical response. Everything. You can do that, and you can do it at a ridiculous scale because they did do it decades ago. They're still doing it with Dragon Ball Super, where like they'll just introduce some new, more powerful guy, and then all of a sudden, like we said, the paradigm evolves a little bit. Okay, now the Saiyans are coming. Oh man, those Saiyans are powerful, but oh man, the Ginyu Force, and no, now it's Frieza. Now Cell is showing up. It's just you just get that you can make more numbers on top of numbers. Let's keep doing that.
Yeah.
So oh boy, this is one of those things. It's almost hard to even talk about because
what's your solution? What's your solution? Is there a solution, or is it mechanical? Is it setting driven?
Pretty much all three. All the stuff you outlined, which was cost to power, which helps balance it from the premise. That framework has to be really important. So, like, we have you use prana, which is our equivalent of chi, your magic go-go juice. So, like, getting that cost scale correct required a lot of playtesting and a lot of math. But once you do that, you've got a good frame for making the powers have a balance, or in this case, a very carefully crafted imbalance. So that you have reasonable trade-offs between powers. So that makes something that's kind of tactically interesting. You did that in your game. Wandering Heroes is a whole bunch of powers, and they all inherently have a trade-off in them. They're not 100% balanced. That's by design. They're imbalanced enough that you can make a tactically rich landscape. Mm-hmm. Same thing. So that's the first bedrock thing. If you can get that right, the rest isn't too bad. Then, I have social consequences in the form of you can only learn these techniques if you go and wrap yourself in the drama and the dangers and the enemies, etc., and the obligations of a martial sect. You have to acquire a lore, and that requires you to kind of take on the responsibility of whoever taught you, because you're their disciple now. And there's social consequences of that, so that goes forward into the game. Like, okay, I've got this powerful technique, but now I've got a whole bunch more enemies that I have to deal with. Or whatever. I've got expectations of me. Or alternatively, you could steal it, and then you've got them as enemies. So it's impossible to acquire technique without acquiring baggage. So that's what you've got, an ongoing thing. And then you have the evolving tactical landscape where, I mean, like, it's the thing about a game, especially with a game, if the players have it, the go-to, I don't need to think about this solution of a GM is give that exact same power to a bad guy. Suddenly it's balanced. Suddenly they've got a rival. Suddenly you've got an inherently evolved tactical landscape by just straight up making a bad guy with the same powers as a good guy. If you have a big enough game, and in our game the power levels are tiered quite a bit, you can just say, okay, I'm just going to reach from this higher tier. I'm going to take a bunch of people from the same tier. So everything we talked about, evolving tactical landscape, basic cost and balance of powers, and social stuff, all still works. You just got to understand that you're dealing with a much bigger, more explosive scale.
Okay. Yeah, because one thing what I've sort of done too is I've had the sort of social limitations operate on the martial hero level in the setting, but then when you get up to the immortal levels and stuff like that, those kinds of limitations become more embedded in the cosmology. Like you need to be merciful to get this ability, like this pathway of abilities to work. That kind of thing. And so that I find that can be helpful. It can work with certain, even like regular. They're like in Return of Condor Heroes. There's a technique that the master of Passionless Valley uses, and it's a really effective technique, and it makes him really difficult to kill. But in order to use this style of kung fu, you can never eat meat. If you touch meat, your kung fu, that part of your kung fu just evaporates. You can't use it anymore. So one of the ways that they deal with them is somebody slips a drop of blood into his tea right before he's going to fight, and then he loses his big power. Putting things like that in the game too, that players actually have to worry about. If there's a technique that's really, really good, but you do this one thing, it totally messes it up. That can be harrowing enough that only the most the most ambitious and gambling-minded players will go for it.
Yeah. Actually, there was a lot of talk about that in Legends of the Wulin too, because they had cultivation restrictions. They went a lot into the Taoist sexual alchemy and stuff like that, which it's a little bit something I wasn't really super interested in developing in this game, but it did get called out as something that that is actually a part of the genre. The only problem I actually had with it as a designer for not putting it into the game wasn't the kind of the squick factor. It was actually just that in Legends, they didn't really. There was no actual penalty. You had to basically want to make that something that penalized your character, and you would add that onto your sheet. But it wasn't part of the actual underpinning of how the mechanics worked. Okay. So that was my issue with it. I was like, well, I have to do all this work. I don't want to.
that can be a big deterrent sometimes.
Sometimes it's just you got to think of the work versus reward. How many people are clamoring for that? Probably not many. And there's plenty of other places to go with it that I think are a little more interesting and more of a broad appeal.
It doesn't necessarily have to be in that territory too. You can get into stuff that just sort of deals with the difference of yin and yang and how that would I have some techniques that only women can use or only guys can use and things like that. And, or if a woman or a guy want to use it, they have to do something specific in order to gain access to that ability.
Man, I admire that, but that's one of those bridges, those cultural bridges, that's really hard to cross in today's political landscape. Because there's a huge thing about duality and gendering in Chinese mythology that's so huge.
Yeah.
And you almost can't talk about it in those terms in the Western world anymore. It's such a hot button issue.
I don't know though, because I feel like even in a lot of these the source material, there is still this spectrum that you could kind of come at it from any number of angles. You can sort of take the duality approach, but there's also, the movie we saw, Swordsman 2, a couple of weeks ago. That character is basically a trans woman character. And this is a film that was made in the 90s in Hong Kong.
It doesn't make any bones about it. It's and that the fact that she is trans is such an important part of her character, too. She has a romance that's, really well developed. A heterosexual romance with the straight male lead, and he is straight up in love with her, and there's a tragic element to it.
Yeah.
So I think you maybe got a point there. Maybe I'm just not being complete enough in my view here.
Well, I think it's the kind of territory. I mean, everybody's got to sort of approach this in a way that they feel that they can. But my view on it is that there's plenty in the source material that it can be used so many different ways that and also you kind of have to decide how much, like I assume when I make stuff, I assume that the audience that's reading it is aware that I'm drawing on source material that has these ideas, and that and if and one thing that'll so just as an example, to use something a little bit less charged but still potentially something controversial that comes up in games. Mine's set in a society based on Song Dynasty China, and that is kind of that there is a difference between being a man and a woman in that kind of setting. But what I say in the book is I say, look, that's what it's based on. That's kind of how I present it. But martial heroes, they can kind of do what they want anyways. So there's that if you don't really want to care about it. And it's ultimately up to you. Like, I don't really care what anybody does at their table. You know what I mean? Like, but but I point out all of the genre conventions that exist to get around that problem. So, there's the thing that the female characters that dress up. I'm sorry?
That's probably the best way to do it when you're having to deal with the actual like reality of misogyny existing in the historical past. Like, if you have a historical game, that's a part of it.
I mean yeah, like, it's there. And again, I don't really. My view on it is every table is going to approach that stuff differently. So I don't really care if people want to mix things, they can. If they want to include them, they can. But I think that it's I don't know. As a reader, I find it insulting when they hide things from me that I'm gonna discover on my own when I go to the source material. So I'd rather that it be there.
I don't really encounter that very often. What I more commonly encounter nowadays is games that are trying to make that conversation you would have as an adult with your friends at a table. Mm-hmm. They're trying to make that part of the element of the game itself. Like in Exalted 3rd Edition, and I'm still not really sure how to feel about this. They have a rule called the Red Rule, which is basically don't put anything that is going to make your characters uncomfortable in like a romantic or sexual sense in the game without talking to your players about it. And it's not just like something that's in the rule book about, hey, you should talk about this like it was in the older editions. It's a rule. Like it's a thing you can like address as a player. And like, I don't know, that's a comfortable place to put that conversation. This is probably a conversation we should have in the future, by the way. But yeah, like just to kind of put a pin in this, so you're thinking about it. Like, it's certainly a strange and novel way to approach it. It's gotten a lot of praise, I've noted. So maybe I'm a dinosaur in this regard. But it's something to think about and kind of chew on. I mean, I may have to see if there's an open source version of this I can let you read, because I kickstarted that one. Like I backed that.
So I don't know that rule, so it's a little hard for me to comment on. But I mean, I'm older than you, and so I'm probably even more of a dinosaur. But I don't know. I guess my feeling on that is that seems like a reasonable thing for people to discuss at their table. I don't know that I need the rules to tell me that I need to do that, though.
It might be aimed at a different audience than us, which is something to consider.
I feel like I kind of already know that if it's going to be like, I don't mind them reminding me like, hey, this could get spicy. Maybe you should talk to each other. I don't know that I want, but what I don't really want is I don't want the designers of the game to decide for me how I'm going to handle mature content.
Yeah, I don't want them to try and
like
because
to me
like
that's
they're
a little
infantilizing you, and what's that all about? You know?
Yeah, that. Again, I mean, I'm not aware of the rule that you're talking about, so I want to be very careful here and sort of giving my response.
That's the thing. Even it's been a while since I read it, because and you've seen my rants on Exalted 3rd Edition. Like I've kind of softened on it, but my initial blush with it was like I'm so mad that I paid money for this.
Okay.
I was so furious, and so I read that rule, and it was while I was reading the whole document. And, like, for me, reading Exalted 3rd Edition was just me, like, looking at it, reading, like, a paragraph or two and just, like, clucking my tongue, like, oh, no, you didn't.
Here's what I would say. Whenever I do read something, I do try to be as charitable as I can. So I would look at it through the lens of not being angry at them. If there were mechanics that you didn't like, trying to sort of shake that out of your head and look at it.
It's such a weird beat. I don't want to derail this to talk about EX3. It's a fascinating topic to breach into. For the record, we might do an episode where I'm just like, okay, here's
people
my thing.
People do use it for wuxia, so I think it's a reasonable thing to discuss.
And I don't, and like, especially when talking about high-powered wuxia, Exalted's sort of your go-to. Like, I wouldn't be a game designer without Exalted. So, like, I owe it a lot. But at the same time, I don't necessarily owe Exalted 3rd Edition anything, because I already have a library of 2nd Edition stuff and 1st Ed stuff. When I got 3rd, I was like, well, I guess this is just the tombstone for the rest of my collection.
Okay.
Because I didn't back the Dragon-Blooded one, this new one they got out.
I think I have the 1st edition book. I don't follow Exalted all that much, but I mean I'm aware of it. Obviously, it's a game.
It's hard not to be.
Yeah,
like that game is big.
And I am aware that there is sharp division from edition to edition. So, but yeah, I don't know. I guess when again, not really talking about that rule specifically because it's not one that I've read yet, and so I don't really know the content of it. But generally speaking, I don't mind if the book sort of draws something to my attention and says, hey, this thing might become an issue in your game. You might want to think about it.
Oh, yeah.
But
Legends did that, too. Where it would talk in the section about sexual alchemy, it was like, hey, look, you don't have to put this in there. This is something you can consider if you want to, but... And, like, it did. It treated you like an adult. Yeah. It said, here's a thing. It's your table. Which is really all I wanted to say.
Yeah, because that's kind of how I want to be. I know myself. I know the people that I'm playing with better than the person writing the book, and so I just don't know that a one-size-fits-all approach is workable in these. And also, I think I could be wrong, but I feel like there's a really sharp East Coast, West Coast divide, and maybe you living where you live, that might be a meaningless distinction that I'm making.
Yeah, but, I think I know it's still my native culture. I mean, I'm not a coastal guy. My mother was from California, but like she grew up in Ohio. I'm in Missouri, so like, yeah, there's some cultural drift, and like a lot of that, like, and I'll tell you from the like Bible Belt perspective on you coastal people is that you're all freaks.
Oh, I know. I have relatives from Missouri.
Both coasts have their own freak flag they fly.
Well, and sometimes we are freaks, but I think that the thing that I don't know. So over here on the East Coast, and again, it's not ubiquitous because obviously they're and I hate to keep reusing that word, but whatever.
Ubiquity is a good term for this.
But there's a lot of different regions here, and there are places that are more like what you would find in the West for sure. But among the people that I play with, whenever there was something floating around called the X card for a while, and other types of techniques.
I remember that.
And I floated the idea with them just because I'm like, well, I'm like an old man. Let me see if I'm out of touch. But when I mentioned it to people, all I got was laughter. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And it's not that.
Exact same thing happened to me.
Yeah,
I read that article on RPGNet, and I was like, oh, okay, maybe I'm really out of touch here. And I talked to my wife, and like, 'cause I game with women a lot, and I was like, am I making you guys uncomfortable? And it was just laughter. It was like, you're an idiot. Elves, dragons, go.
Yeah, and I think what I learned is like really what most people want is they want you, at least in my experience, they want you to not have to even get to the point of using something like that. It doesn't mean that you have carte blanche to do whatever you want, but you should be aware of what the other players are. When people will let you know, not always directly, but you should be able to sense when there's discomfort in the room. And
yeah, ultimately that's where it came with me too, where I was like, I realized at a certain point that like, hey, look, I don't have this problem when I'm talking to people or hanging out with people or anything. I don't have that problem in my games, probably because I just don't have that problem in general. Yeah. As a person who understands how social things work, I know when I've crossed a line. A game doesn't have to teach me that. I'm an adult. I know that.
Yeah.
And
something that I'll do is I'll frequently talk to my players. Like I'll ask them, like, okay, is all this stuff okay? You know what I mean? You just kind of, you can ask for information. Again, maybe it's different if you're playing a lot at hobby stores and things like that. It's very
different if you're meeting people and gaming with them.
Yeah.
Like there's significant difference because I've tried that. I've tried just meeting and gaming with people. And I find that those social boundaries get smashed into a lot more often unintentionally in that kind of scenario. So it's not like there's no thought behind the X card. Like I don't want to just sit here and just mock it because remember, it was developed to serve a need.
Yeah.
And like there's some validity to that. So
I could sort of see it having a function at like that kind of situation. Like I go to you're playing at a game store and it's all people that you never met or whatever. Because I'll be honest, I don't play at game stores anymore. Because the last time I went to one, some kid punched another kid in the face, and
Jesus,
and there was it was, and I was like, what's going on? Like, this is not what I'm looking for when I game. So I don't go to game stores to game. I do it with friends, and that's worked for me. That's
wait a minute, back up. I want to know the story about the kid punching the kid in the face.
I don't remember exactly what was going on because they were so spastic, and there was like this constant back and forth. Like, it was this kind of situation where it was at a game store, and there was a wide spectrum of ages represented, number one. So I think you probably had people that were like 15 to 40 playing together, and that's like, I don't have 15-year-old energy level. Do you know what I mean? And attention span. So there were two guys that kept kind of getting up, going and doing things, and getting in each other's faces for a variety of reasons. And I think one of them insulted the other one at a certain point, and I don't know, it just escalated. And the next thing I knew is they were fighting in the hobby store, and somebody got punched in the course of the fight, and then the kid started crying and screaming, and he ran out. So it was a really, again, this was probably a freak situation that I just sort of stumbled into because it was my first time going back to a hobby store after a while, and just being like, hey, I'm going to try the local gaming scene type situation, and it just did not go well. I was like, I don't need this.
Holy Lord.
And the thing is, like, at that time, fighting was one of my hobbies. I liked martial arts, but I don't want any of that at the table. I don't want any kind of personal conflict.
Going to a martial arts dojo and fighting in a disciplined way and throwing a punch over some kid over an elf game, though. Yeah. This is a golf, man.
I don't know. I think, so again, all I'm trying to sort of say with that is that I can see how stuff like those kind of tools might be handy in that kind of situation, maybe. But I don't game at stores, so I don't know. And I don't think an X card would have. I don't think it would have solved this problem.
My God. Yeah, I don't. In a situation like that, and I think, and this is my perspective on it as an old, out of touch white guy. Like, there comes a point where the problem is no longer with the game; it is with the people. And like the X cards and the punching comes into it, like that feels like that's not really in the scope of a game. You can't make a rule or a construct, a feather passing, as it will, that will fix that. You just need to be better people.
Yeah,
I'm like, I can't fix that for you, buddy.
The player's handbook is not designed to bludgeon people with, but it can be used for that. And there's not much that they can do to stop you from, if you're intent on using, something that for a purpose it isn't designed for. So yeah, I mean, that's an extreme example, I know, but
so this conversation went to an interesting place.
Well, no, but I think it's something that we kind of got here because what we were talking about was, I think what we were originally discussing was the whole issue that can come up with. I think you were talking about Taoist sex magic, basically, and I was talking about like yin yang, energy having meaning in the setting, and there are challenges to that, and what we were trying to get at was ultimately, I think we both sort of agree, that you don't necessarily want to infantilize the audience with when you do bring that material to the design table. But I don't know.
You don't want to bring something like that to the game and then immediately assume your audience is too immature to deal with it. That seems like a contradiction to me.
Okay.
So if you're going to talk about sex magic, like, assume that you are talking to an adult audience. Mm-hmm. Just assume that. I mean, it's already a game that requires a pretty sophisticated intellect to wrap your mind around. So, like, and you don't have to be necessarily an adult, but I think that if you're going to be running a role-playing game, if you don't, at the very core of that, understand the social contract of just not being a complete wingnut as a human being, nothing I can write in a rulebook is going to fix that problem.
Well, I think too the thing that you have to know your table, like and you have to know your game, and so like not every game needs that sort of thing. I just feel like if you're drawing on genre material and you're trying to be like not authentic. Authentic is the wrong word, but if you're trying to,
I think authentic is the correct nomenclature for that, because what you want to do is be genuine to the genre. You want to accurately and honestly represent it. And like, I mean, and actually, I kind of made fun of the authors of Legends of the Wulin when that came into a forum, and someone was talking about sex magic and how like was that going to be in the game. I was like, nah, that's squick. I don't want to move around from that. And someone called me out on it, and I'm kind of glad they did, because it got me thinking about it in a more sophisticated way. It was like, okay, well, maybe this was more important to people than I thought it was, and maybe just being honest to the genre was something important to the authors of this game, and I was selling them short, and I really feel like I was, because when I went and reread that section after getting my keister roasted on the forums about that, I was like, you know what, actually, this is pretty well written. So, yeah, I'm publicly proven wrong about that one.
Well,
I mean,
and it's one of those things too. If you're dealing with a genre that's not an American genre, or not like something that is a genre in English speaking countries, you're going to encounter things that are they're not there's gonna, like, if you watch a lot of wuxia, you're going to see things that might upset some of our sensibilities, and then so you have to decide as a designer, how much of that you're going to incorporate. And I guess my inclination is to incorporate it because it's there. And I feel like if I don't, then then I might be misleading people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, like underrepresenting something that's actually an important element.
Yeah.
I've got before I ever encountered role-playing games, I was a big martial arts fan. Mm-hmm. And like I got a book from I think 1979, which was Kung Fu, and it was like myth and reality. And it was written by two authors. One was American and one was Chinese. And like it had a lot of that stuff in there. I was like, hey, look, here's the mystical underpinnings of this stuff. Of course, this is just mythology, but here it is. And so I was conversant with Taoist sexual alchemy long before Legends of the Wulin came along. And like I read that as a kid, as like a 15, 16-year-old kid, and I was just like, I know about sex. It wasn't that huge of a deal to me, but people have a broad range of encountering these topics. And
And also with that stuff, there are ways to handle it if you don't want to get, if you want to be like PG, there are ways to handle it. Again, we'll hopefully get to that movie Holy Flame of the Martial World, because they kind of get into that territory. Yeah, you'll see what I mean when we get there, where they really make it much more palatable. And so, I think that's again, it's just one of these things where you're drawing on something from another country, and there's going to be stuff in there that's going to be dealt with differently. And
you may have to put cultural appropriation as one of the things that we talk about, because we are both white dudes that are super into like Chinese and Indian, etc. culture stuff.
I don't know. I might be too old to talk about that.
It's sort of how I feel about it too, because I'm like, I don't even understand how you'd put it's almost pernicious in my estimation to put a value on culture, like a monetary value. I'm like, that's not really how culture works, guys.
So I don't want to get too side railed into all this stuff, because we don't normally cover these things. But we've gotten into it, so I will at least explain my position on it. I feel that it's sort of barking up the wrong tree, the cultural appropriation concern. I understand why people have it, but I think that we already have something to deal with that issue, which is cultural sensitivity, which anybody that's dealing with stuff from another culture, can do without getting into the whole cultural appropriation argument. And my concern with the whole cultural appropriation thing is, number one, when I actually talk to people from China or from these other countries, they're really excited that people like their an aspect of their culture, and are trying to use it creatively or share it. And so I feel like it's a very first world concern, or at least like a very academic concern.
You may have a point there. I don't move in academic circles, so like.
But also I feel I do feel like you do want to be sensitive. I just don't think that I think if you stifle people's ability to borrow aesthetics from each other, then you don't end up with those wonderful Cho Yuen movies from the 70s, because a lot of those are him borrowing from genres from America, and people from other countries borrowing from them. And there's this
yeah, I like to point out, like, whenever I see cool, like when I see like Western stuff, in like a Japanese or like a Chinese movie, I don't feel like I've been robbed of my culture. I feel like, dude, look what they did. That's awesome. And I'm pretty sure that's a mutual feeling.
No, and I understand that the cultural appropriation argument is premised on something where, there's sort of this uneven exchange, but I just feel like you will not have a richness of culture, and ultimately it just kind of puts people in their lane and they have to stay there. And I don't like that idea
where like it's like, oh, you're Chinese, you can only do no. No, that's a line that feels racist.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I feel like you start putting people in boxes. That said, I mean, obviously there is a difference between a white guy and a guy who was raised in China handling the material. But I mean, that's obvious.
You have cultures that are different. That respecting those differences is important. Not like, but that doesn't mean that separating them to clean little boxes and never having the boxes touch. What the hell is that?
Yeah.
So like that's my feeling about it. It's just like, look, I like things being messy. I want to go over and talk with the guy from China because that's fun and we're human and that,
That's sort of where I come from because again, I'm a dinosaur, so I'm probably coming at this from like an old man angle. But like my attitude is I like. Like my wife's from another country. I like interacting with people from other cultures, and I feel like a lot of the ideas that are sort of percolating around cultural appropriation actually make that much harder to do, because they make people, especially people that don't have the education or the exposure to. I mean, these are really academic ideas that are not instantly understandable. You kind of have to delve into them a bit, and so. I think that if you don't have that grounding, it can make even communicating with people from another culture very difficult. So, I don't know. I understand where the concern comes from, but I just feel like I think it's barking up the wrong tree. I think that cultural sensitivity is a much more reasonable expectation to have. And again, I think we can have conversations about that. But I think not every single negative reaction to something that's done with the culture is necessarily going to be the valid reaction, and so we have to use some discernment and judgment around that stuff, and and hopefully, I mean, again, I think I don't know.
Just having the humility to understand that sometimes you're going to screw up as a human being, and that doesn't make you a racist. Like my thing, whenever I was kind of making fun of the like Eric and all the guys who did Legends of the Wulin for the Taoist sexual alchemy, that was pretty thoughtless of me. I'm just gonna cop to it. That was kind of a dick move. I really was sort of doing short shrift to like a really important aspect of the cultural mythology. You're right. I screwed up. I admit that, and you know what? I repent. Let's move on. I understand the value now. What? Like, that doesn't have to haunt you for the rest of your life. You can be wrong. That's not a big deal. Being wrong is part of eventually being right.
Well, I think, I think that with all of these things, you I don't know, again, I just go back to, you can do it in a sensitive way. It's not like you have to, everybody has to stay in their lane, but I think it, being sensitive to something, like not being blatantly offensive or something, that's a reasonable expectation. I just feel like the cultural appropriation argument is very amorphous and ever changing, and I feel like the rules keep shifting around it, and I don't know what the ultimate end game with it is, and it's an idea that I'm inherently suspicious of when I encounter it. And so. Again, like I said, I want to live in a world where people can play with different aesthetics from different places, and it's not going to be an issue. I don't know. Maybe that's not the world that we're in anymore, though. So, like I said, I'm a dinosaur. I don't know.
Dark. Let's not end it on that note. Let us assume that we can live in that world if we're not living in it now, so we can end this on kind of a positive note. Because one of the unfortunate things about right now in the social political landscape of the world is that we have all this horrible stuff coming around. There's so many downbeat moments. So let's end this on a positive thing where it's like, hey, look, you and I both design kung fu games as modern American white dudes, and we do so out of a place of love and out of a genuine love for the cultures and mythologies of the people that originated them. So like I can speak for David in that regard too. David Ramirez, the guy that's writing it, the guy lives in China. He is in love with that culture. So yeah, this is a positive place, and we really want to make certain we are sharing the things that we love about these. I mean, admittedly foreign and non-native cultures of ours. No. So that's something I want to end it there. Like it's this particular tangent, okay. I want it to be really positive.
All right, I'll give you the last word then. And so right, I guess we've kind of gone off in a direction we weren't anticipating.
South with this one.
So we'll go to the next segment then. All right, so now we're just going to end with after that really extravagant detour into the world of politics, we will end with just us sharing stuff that we've gamed or that we've seen that we think might be relevant here. Something that I was able to play a couple of weeks ago, and I think I got 2 sessions in, and we're still looking for a third session. Maybe we got 3 sessions. Well, either way, we had a couple of Saturdays or so. I got a chance to play Hill Folk, which is a game that is really kind of outside my normal range of play styles, and I really enjoyed myself. I had a lot of fun playing it, but it was very different. It's a very different approach, and I didn't get to experience the whole game because there's like a whole aspect of play that we just never came up yet in the sessions that we're running. But basically in Hill Folk, it's one of these games where you sort of structure things around scenes, and the players have a certain amount of control in terms of determining when they enter a scene and things like that and what the scene is. And so what I found it was good for was, number one, getting kind of like a soap opera style of play where it's all focused on the dialogue and the conversation. The difficult thing that I found for me as a player is I'm not accustomed to stepping outside of my character and saying, okay, now, this scene is going to be in the woods, where the body has been dismembered, and you know what I mean. Like if you're not on the ball, it can be difficult. But what I really enjoyed about the game was the actual scenes themselves, because they were so focused on the dialogue, and so.
So what's Hill Folk about? Like context wise, like what's the thesis of the game?
Well, I wasn't running it, so I don't know the full extent of the rules. It's by Robin Laws, and it really kind of takes things like he's had games that venture into this territory. This one really sort of goes full bore into the like the idea of focusing on drama, and to the extent that everything is structured around that, and it gets into sort of very experimental mechanics for managing it, and so I don't think it's going to be something that would work for if you're a group that really likes sort of like a much more traditional structure to play. It's probably not your cup of tea, but I really enjoyed the when those scenes happened. The focus was so much on what the characters were saying, and everybody had because when you're playing your character in every scene, you're supposed to have you have something that you want to get out of the scene. It's basically, it takes like acting stuff and puts it into a role-playing context, and so again, for soap opera style play, it was I found it very effective. It's not a style that I'm as familiar with, so I don't know. I'm sure there might be other games that get into this, that do things that, but I'm not as aware of them.
It sounds like Fiasco. Did you ever play that one?
I haven't played it. I have a copy of it, but I've never played it.
I think you're going to see a lot of similarity in Fiasco. I think where you're asked as a player to have a more active hand in like the structure of scenes and things like that.
But the thing is, I read Fiasco, and this seems so different from that to me.
Really?
Yeah, because this felt like, again, I'm usually like, I saw Fiasco and I was kind of like, well, that looks nice. I want to try it just to see what it's like, but it's not really my cup of tea. Like, it's not the style of game I like to play. But with Hill Folk, maybe it's just because Law's name is on it. My opinion changed. But
it's good stuff. Whenever you said his name, I was like, that sounds familiar. I realized I just backed his King in Yellow Kickstarter not too long ago. Okay. And I'm like, oh, okay. I know you. He does good stuff.
But I mean, again, it's a very specific type of game. But what it worked for was, like, I could see with that, what I thought it would be good for is if I wanted to run like iClaudius, like I wanted to really have the experience of iClaudius, that the system seemed like it would work well with that. You know, again, you get you know, just things that have a lot of melodrama and you know, political intrigue and stuff like that. It sort of is all about that.
You really intrigued me with that because, like, I like that stuff too. I mean, maybe that's a little mawkish, but I don't care. It's fun. So where are you rolling dice in this? Is it like I say something dramatic and I roll dice?
You know, I should have paid more attention to what we were actually doing. I don't remember rolling at all. But we never actually had a combat scene. That was the thing. So that was a part of the system that we never actually touched on. So it was all role play. So the role play scenes, they were all, the only thing that was really different about them was you had resources that could allow you to do things like break into a scene. So say there was like there was a scene between two characters deciding what to do about an impending invasion. You could use a resource to insert yourself into that scene if you wanted to. And I think you were allowed to go in the scene, but people could try to block you, and then that's when you would use the resource. I can't remember the exact rule, but most of the mechanics seem stuff like that.
So it seems like the core thing, the core I almost want to call it a resource of the game is the dialogue itself. That's interesting. Like, how does that manifest? Like, whenever you would introduce yourself into a scene, it would be to talk, I assume.
Yeah.
So, like, think about that. Like, develop that a little.
Well, again, my grasp of the system is a little bit fuzzy, but the way
use an example. I mean, that'd be elucidating.
The way that the game is sort of structured is you begin play by, you kind of create like a map of character relationships and establishing who's who and what people want and what's going on a little bit. It's almost like a show Bible. Do you know what I mean? Like a TV series Bible, but like in really shorthand form. And that's all constructed at the start of the game by everybody. And then once you have that kind of gives you what you need in order to launch into the scenes. And so I think it's done in sort of sequential order where, you know, you start with, you know, one player and then you move down, you know, you move from one to the next. And basically the whole scene launching thing, if I understood it correctly, was, you know, the GM, you know, would say to me, you know, like, it's my turn, like, what do I want to do? And so I'd say, okay, I'm by the bank of the river with so and so, and, you know, I'm trying to and I come there with a pelt that I've just acquired because I want her to make a war cloak for our chieftain, and so then once I'm there, it's just me and that character talking. Do you know what I mean? It's stuff that emerges in regular games. The only real difference is because every scene you have something that you want from it, and the other character has something that they want from it. It just naturally produces a little bit more of that soap opera type play. You know, again, that really feels like the focus of the game. It feels like the character interactions,
like sort of like how diplomacy plays, where there's very little rules in the game diplomacy, but like the true game of diplomacy is convincing other people to do what you want them to do.
Yeah.
So like, since you have a goal in a scene, like a social goal, and you have no mechanics for pursuing that, you have to pursue that through the role play. So I like that. That's a nifty way of kind of drawing it out of people, I think.
Yeah. So
actually, I did something similar with Tiansheng, where, like, to get XP in that game, you have to, and actually I sort of stole this, by the way, from Marvel Heroic Roleplay and the Cortex system, so thank you, Cam Banks, because, you know, anyway, but to get XP in my game, you've got to do something that furthers your dharma, your destiny, and most of it is getting you into trouble in some way.
Okay.
And there's a little back and forth with the GM where you're like, I want to do this thing because my dharma is telling me to do it, and they kind of like work with you to determine exactly how that's going to manifest in the game, and then you do it, and then there's going to be whatever consequences, and you get XP. So, like, and I think it's kind of similar in the regard that the Dharma has a goal, it's something that it wants you to do, like the Monkey King has got the Chaos Dharma, so it wants him to introduce some chaos into the world in kind of this structured, helpful fashion. So like, and like if you go through that PDF I sent you, like you'll see the crazy stuff he's supposed to do, and like I have a good way and bad way of doing it. Like, so you can do it the helpful, make chaos work and introduce important change. Then you have the burnt to the ground.
But it sounds like what you've done is you've baked it into the cosmology itself, into the setting.
Yeah.
This is so. I think that's the big difference between that and this. And in this one, it's sort of more of a part of the system. But yeah, and that's probably how I would do it in one of my own games. Is I would probably go more for the in-setting type thing. I should emphasize, I might be misunderstanding aspects of the system because I played it like 2 or 3 times, and I was just a player. I didn't have access to the rule book, so everything I was doing was based on what the GM was telling me. So if I misunderstood a key point, I do apologize. But I had fun. It was and the setting that we were using was sort of, I guess, like the standard one. There's a bunch of different types of settings you can run it for. It's not just meant to be the hillfolk thing, but we were like a primitive tribe, sort of in the as like civilization is just starting to emerge, was my understanding. Like and so it was interesting. It was a fun session, or fun 2 sessions.
The Clay That Woke by Paul Sega kind of got a similar thing, except it's a little more fantastical. It's got like minotaurs and things like that.
Okay, I remember seeing that Kickstarter when it popped up.
Yeah, I actually wound up grabbing that post Kickstarter, which was a pretty penny because it doesn't have dice. It has these little pogs you've gotta use with it. But like it's a really nifty little game. It's the best like 90-ish pages you'll ever read. So. And
now you have something that's a little bit more kind of in, I think, more my wheelhouse. Why don't you explain it?
Okay, so as is probably fairly common knowledge about like both of us at this point, we're big fans of the old school Renaissance. We like old D&D, and one of the products that came out for that a little while ago was Yoon Suin, the Purple Land, and it's kind of a setting book for just this little sort of vaguely Near Eastern / Eastern setting with a little bit of kind of kooky, weird elements to it. And like it's humble in that it doesn't really stretch far past that premise, but at the same time, it's extraordinarily complete and extremely useful for making this setting very vibrant and very unique whenever you use it. I almost don't know how to talk about Yoon Suin, because what it basically is, it's a collection of really short, really impactful descriptions of this world, this setting of Yoon Suin, and like it's got all these different little chunks to it. Like there's like a forbidden city, and there's like this aristocracy of slug people, and there's magical drugs, so magical opium, and there's like these plains full of grasshopper men, and like all this nifty stuff. But instead of being like these really long descriptive paragraphs, it's really short things. You get like half a paragraph, and it's like really, really rich and really imaginative, and it's really impactful. And then it's a chart, which is here's some stuff you find, and here's how you put that in your game. And the whole book is that. It's just introduction of a really cool idea, a really cool setting thing, and a whole bunch of charts and elements that you can grab and make that just on the fly. And it is such an amazing tool for doing that. Like I use Yoon Suin in almost every single game I run now. Because if I ever need something, even if I'm not in Yoon Suin, like even if I'm nowhere near that setting, I can pull stuff from it and be like, okay, in the far distant lands of Yoon Suin, they have this strange thing, and you found that here. Or you find a merchant from Yoon Suin, or whatever. Some strange monster comes at them, or a minor god, or a half of an ogre will hop at them with using dark magic and curses, and they're like, "What's this?" And I'm like, "I got it from Yoon Suin. Good luck." Okay.
Now, what would you say? Because I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of people that see Yoon Suin all over. Like they see the cover, because I know that pops up on Google Plus and Facebook and forums all the time. But I'll bet there's a lot of people that have seen it and have not. They don't really know what it is. What's the big reason that is it the brevity of the entries and the imaginative quality of them, or is there something else that really makes this? because it's clearly resonated with a lot of people.
It has, and like there's a good reason for it. If I had, it's hard to point down one thing where I'm like, this is the big idea, because it's almost like you know the old Oriental Adventures thing.
Yeah.
Talk about like a thing that's been lambasted for cultural appropriation is Oriental Adventures. It's called Oriental Adventures. Dear Lord, but there's a reason to love that book because there's a lot of really cool, fun stuff in it for your D&D game. It's like that, except a million times better. And even though, and it does a much better job of being respectful to the culture in kind of the same way that D&D is sort of respectful to Western cultural tropes. This is kind of respectful to Eastern and Near Eastern cultural tropes in that it doesn't take them too seriously, and it uses them as kind of like the fertile soil in which to grow its own little brand of weirdness and gonzo stuff. Okay. And I actually chose it specifically because of the gonzo stuff, but since we've been talking about the cultural stuff, well, yeah. I mean, that's there too.
Okay.
So the big thing is if you want something kind of exotic and that has that kind of same sort of cultural, real-world cultural bedrock of D&D, and you want it to mesh in an unusual and unexpected and interesting way, grab Yuan-Suan. Because you can run a game in Yuan-Suan. And like what I would recommend is, like, if you're just going to straight up run a game in Yuan-Suan, make traditional, like, Western D&D characters, start them on the boat, and they're in Yuan-Suan. It's all weird, and they get to learn about the strangeness and the exoticness of the culture firsthand. And then you can just make whole campaigns in it, because it's just that complete. But you could also, like I said, you could just grab one little bit. Like at one point here in my most recent campaign, I had an island, and I'm like, I don't know what's on this island. But it's got an observatory and a jungle, so I just went to the jungle section and the observatory section, and I just grabbed some stuff from the charts, and it just became its own little thing. Just like that. Bam. I've got everything I need for that island. I had a whole session worth of adventures there out of 30 seconds of referencing this book. So it's almost like a big bag of different kinds of seeds of exotic fruit, and you don't know what the seeds are or what they do, but it has very good instructions on how to plant them, and then the growing of those seeds into weird fruit trees is what happens when you run the game. Okay. So that's Yuan-Suan. It's a bag of exotic and unexpected interesting things you can plant in your game.
And I gotta say, I ran Oriental Adventures in both editions. I quite liked the material, yeah, but I think the biggest trouble I had with Oriental Adventures was when I would try to do something specific, like when I tried to do specifically a Wuxia campaign. You obviously have to sort of work around some of the elements, and because especially I think more in second edition than first edition. But in the second edition, they were more interwoven, and so I found it a little bit harder to kind of get the like the Japanese stuff into Japan and the Chinese stuff into China. But I quite like them. I ran about at least 2 or 3 Wuxia campaigns with the second edition. Not second edition, third edition Oriental Adventures. And again, with a lot of that material, so much of it is you kind of make of it what you will and turn it into your own. So, but yeah. So I don't know. Is there anything else that you wanted to go over before we head out?
I could sing the praises of Yuan-Suan for a long time. Okay. I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, I'm really underselling it. Well, it's been nothing but praise, but like, there's nothing but praise for that book. Like, if you're an OSR guy or you like weird stuff, you don't own it, go buy it.
It seems like something that is pretty universally liked. Like, I've seen a lot of people who often hold very different opinions saying very good things about it. So it seems like it's got it's got good standing. But what was it? I think we'll end it here because we've been going for a long time, and we might have overwhelmed people with the political stuff. And we'll be back next time. I don't know what we're going to cover. I think we have some things that we know we want to discuss, but we're gonna I didn't get into fated encounters, and I kind of want to talk about that next time. But we'll see what we can sort of work into it. And
we'll have to put the future a little bit. If we're talking about fated stuff, I may have to. What I might do is start talking about Exalted a little bit more. I don't want to be critical of the game because I do love it, but like it might be one of those really big ones to kind of tackle and talk about because in Exalted they have a kind of Exalt who is all about fate, and there's a lot of difficulty when you're talking about like being able to mess with fate and the future and predicting things. Mm-hmm. So like I ruminated on it for a while, and then that'll be fun to talk about.
So yeah, we'll see. You know, we might bring up that in, or we'll see what we have when we get to the next show, and we'll obviously have some other movies and things like that. And also tomorrow I'm going to be doing House of Flying Daggers on Wuxia Weekend, and we're going to go through all three of the Zhang Yimou Wuxia films, and so we're gonna start with we did Hero, now we're on House of Flying Daggers, and then we're gonna do Curse of the Golden Flower. So all right. So again, thanks for listening. We're very happy for all that listened, and we will be back on hopefully in the next couple of weeks.